So you saw someone mention something about using natural consequences in the classroom, and you're wondering what are natural consequences and how do you go about using them in the classroom? Well, today we're going to be diving into what natural consequences are and how to use them in the classroom. So with that being said, let's dive in. Natural consequences, also known as logical consequences, are the logical consequences or reactions to an action. A great way to think about this is Newton's third law of motion, which is every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Well, the same goes for natural consequences. Natural consequences are essentially what you would naturally assume would happen if something were to happen in class. So a good example of this would be, let's say a student makes a mess in the bathroom. The natural consequences would be that they have to clean it up, and then maybe they have to practice what it looks like and sounds like to wash their hands and throw away the trash after they use the restroom. That is a great example of what a natural consequence is. On the other hand, an example of, or not an example of a natural consequence, or the opposite of a natural consequence, could be, let's say a student made a mess in the bathroom, so you take away their recess. The two aren't really correlated to each other, and so it's really hard for your students to learn what the reaction's going to be or what is going to happen when they don't follow what the expectations are. Another example or non-example could be, let's say a student doesn't turn in their homework, so you have them stay in for lunch and on their recess and have them sit on a wall. Again, this is not really related to them not doing their homework, and so the two aren't correlated. So now that we talked about what are natural consequences or logical consequences, let's talk about why you might want to go about using them in class. You see, when you use natural consequences in class, your students are going to learn that when this happens, this happens. So instead of doing it this way, I should try a different way. So students don't learn from, taking recesses away from, for example, or if I were to yell at you when you make a mistake, you're not actually learning what you need to do next time. Instead, a lot of kids will internalize this and just label themselves as a bad kid. Now, I've seen this in my classroom. When I first started teaching, I was taking away recess, and what would often happen is my students wouldn't finish their work, so I took away their recess. When we got back, the student would just have a meltdown and just continuously have a rough time the rest of the day because they didn't learn from their mistakes and they just labeled themselves as a quote unquote bad kid, and they leaned into that, and now they are just trying to do what essentially they believe you called them. On the other hand, when I would go about making sure that whatever consequence was given for whatever action they took, that it was natural. So when I did this, my students would learn from their behavior. They'd learn from their mistake. When I had a student pick up the bathroom after they went about making a huge mess, they learned, okay, if I want to go play with my friends and not spend time cleaning up the bathroom a second time, I'm just gonna do it right the first time. Or if I want to go about getting to recess faster, instead of goofing off with my friends in line and having to practice it again, I'm just gonna follow what it should look like and sound like the first time to make sure I don't miss out on that time. Or let's say, instead of refusing to do my work and miss out on that extra time at the end of the day to spend with my friends and play games, I'm gonna do my work the first time. That way at the end of the day, I can have that time too. All of these were things that my kids naturally learned, and they naturally started to fix themselves after a couple times because they knew that if they did this, then this would be what the consequence was. With all that being said, I want to give you a quick reminder that behavior is just communication. I like really hard to take away the idea that behavior is either good or bad. You either have behavior that's aligned with the expectation, or you have behavior that's misaligned or disruptive. And so helping our students see that instead of them trying to tell you that they need something or want something and it's not being met in a disruptive way, they can go about doing it this way, and you're happy to help them in that way. So now that we talked about what natural consequences are and why we use them in class as opposed to other things in class, let's talk about how to go about using them. So when it comes to figuring out which natural consequences you can use in the classroom, I actually like to take some time over the summer at the beginning of the year to think about different scenarios that might happen in the classroom and how I want to respond when that happens. So here's some examples of some natural consequences you could give in class. And I would love it if you could comment or DM me and let me know what are some natural consequences scenarios you can come up with, and check out the comments, because hopefully by the end we'll have this long list of natural consequences that you can refer to later. So here are some of the ones I personally came up with that are natural consequences in my classroom. Let's say a student is misusing a resource in the classroom, whether that's a tool like a pencil, a glue, their crayons, their markers, something like that. The consequence is then that they get to practice using that resource the right way, or if they continue to misuse it in the not aligned way, then they get to take a break from using that resource until they can use it the proper way again. If I have a student who is misusing scissors and cutting things that they shouldn't be, the natural consequence is I'm going to take those scissors away and I'm going to sit down with them and practice what it should look like and sound like to use those scissors at a later time. Sorry about that. Coda came in and he has a cone on his head, so he's very loud. Another example of this could be, or another natural consequence could be, let's say a student refuses to put on a jacket outside and it's below freezing, or whatever it is, and your district still gave you the okay to go outside, but they're refusing to put on a jacket. The natural consequence could either be they go outside and they get cold, or your student just isn't allowed to go outside until they put their jackets on, and that's the natural consequence. Another natural consequence could be maybe you have a student who's refusing to do work, and that means that later, at a later time when your students are doing free time or they have a break, your student then gets to work on that work that they refuse to do when the other students are playing. A way that I naturally incorporated this is at the elementary level, we did do fun Fridays, but what I ended up doing is at the end of every day, I would try to wrap things up and give my kids anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes to themselves at the end of the day to either play like a community building game or something like that, because I didn't want to take natural breaks that I incorporated throughout the day from my students, because I believe that breaks are required to keep your classroom running and not something that's earned. So instead, I would have my students then who refuse to do their work earlier in the day would spend that time when we are doing a fun game or activity that the class voted on. We would do that while my student was then having to finish the work that they refused to do earlier. Another example of natural consequence could be, let's say you have a student who is running in class. A natural consequence is they get to practice what it looks like and sounds like. Sometimes at that free time at the end of the day or that community building time, I would pull kids throughout the day that we had a talking to earlier and I didn't have a chance to maybe practice a procedure with them. In the moment when I have a sideline conversation, let's say before lunch, I have a student running and I'm going to say, okay, when we come back from lunch during our community building time, we're going to practice what it looks like and sounds like to walk in the classroom. So then I'll have them practice at that time. So natural consequence is if they're running in the classroom, they get to practice what it looks like and sounds like to walk in the classroom. Another example of a natural consequence could be, let's say you have students who are goofing off during carpet or whole group time. A natural consequence could be that student either A, is asked to move away from their friends, or B, they get to practice what it looks like and sounds like at the carpet without disrupting their friends. Let's say you have a student who's goofing off in line. A great natural consequence to this is they get to practice what it looks like and sounds like to follow your expectations in line. Let's say you have a student who's just naturally disrupting others while they're working. They're independently working and they're disrupting their friends. The natural consequence is that student gets to move or sit by the teacher. Another natural consequence is, let's say you have a student who's misusing flexible seating. Natural consequence is they go over the expectations and they get to practice what it looks like and sounds like, or they simply take a break until they're ready to relearn and follow the expectations of that flexible seating. If a student doesn't do their best work or they rush and they didn't do their best, the natural consequence means they get to try that assignment again and redo it. If a student rips up their paper, naturalist consequence is they get to redo that assignment. If a student isn't finishing their assignment and they're refusing to work on it, that means they get to finish while the rest of the class gets free time or gets to do something else. So that's a huge list of just some of the natural consequences I include in my classroom. Which natural consequences do you include in yours? I bet you use a lot more than you think you do in your classroom. So that wraps up everything you need to know about natural consequences. We talked about what natural consequences are. We talked about why natural consequences in the classroom are important. And last but not least, we talked about what are some natural consequences you can include in your classroom. If you want to learn more about classroom management, I have a ton of content in the past couple of weeks and months. I've talked about classroom management. And if you want to take it a step further, I want to invite you to download the Ultimate Classroom Management Guide. It shares all of the top 10 questions I get asked in regards to classroom management and how I answer them, plus it links to additional podcasts and YouTube videos that you can refer back to. The next thing I will invite you to consider, if you want to take it a step further, is I have a classroom management bundle that puts things together like procedures and some other helpful resources that you can use in your classroom to have really strong classroom management skills. My goal as a teacher is to have such good classroom management in my classroom that my students can run the classroom without me. And that's what I like to teach the teachers that I get to teach and mentor online here. The third and final thing I want to invite you to check out is I have a 15-day classroom management challenge. In this challenge, I share everything I do to have really strong classroom management over the course of 15 days. And that's kind of like a mini course, but it's short, sweet, and simple. I give you a prompt each day on something you can work on that takes anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. There's questions you can answer to get to the next prompt. And it's just really walking you through step by step how to go from coming up with a goal that you want to work on in classroom management all the way to getting more class and more students to help you run the classroom. So that way you can step back and have conversations with adults as they come in or help a student one-on-one. All right, so I hope all that was helpful. I would really appreciate it if you could like or subscribe or share this content wherever you are joining us from. That way we can reach more teachers who feel like they could possibly use this information. As always, remember, we are stronger together, and I'll see you in the next one, Teacher Bestie. Bye.